Ms. Mbuli, are women propagating gender-based violence? Is there a situation?
No. No, there's no situation where women propagate gender-based violence for me. I think gender-based violence is, again, as Ndade Rankin has said, it is a problem by men, created by men, propagated by men, encouraged by men, enacted by men. And it boils down to what as men we tolerate, the behaviors we have tolerated, accepted, prided ourselves on, praised ourselves for, and now filter into the society, and what structures allow for that to continue. So I want to go back to something that Ndade Rankin spoke about, and in one of these topics is the absence of fatherhood, and what that, the consequences of that in society. And this is something that I engaged with at length. I tried to in high school, and one of my history teachers, a former colleague of Coach Lucky, his name is Louis Mantata, is a brilliant man. He used to portray this idea that all boys' schools are successful because boys are able to be taught this, responsibility. They can be pulled in line. They can get that man role model kind of leadership. They have that something to look up to, right? And I'm hesitant to this, and this kind of leads me to something that I read in the chat from Rufaro that said maybe we should try and speak less about manhood and speak about humanity, because from 13 onwards was raised by a single mother, right? And I like to think that I was able to be instilled with certain values, So I think there's this idea that men should take responsibility for their families in order to teach men, in order to build other men, and teach men how to be men. Men need to do that, I think that also then kind of becomes problematic. I think we should be aiming at finding values that we as humans want to carry, how we would like to treat each other. It's back to that point of respect, I think as soon as we start stripping away these kind of ideals, these ideas that we have attached to these genders that we think are, what hold up society. As soon as we start stripping those away, I think then we can build a better humanity, and that's a kind of an ideal world. So I think these notions that men have been bred in, like little things like the recreational activities that boys do rather than girls do, recreational activities for 6-year-old, 7-year-old boys is playing with toy guns, it's breaking down buildings, it's bashing cars into each other, So those gender roles that have been assigned to these genders that facilitate these behaviors and these interactions, I think once we start stripping those away and start trying to find common values and common goals that, gender, and I think this is a lot of the reason why people say gender is a social construct, is because it's been built. Gender has been built. So much has been built on top of gender. Man then becomes power, becomes,
Let me stop you right there, Ndade Mbuli. I don't want to interrupt you. Well, I did, but I want to stop you on that point about men have been built. And I want to dive straight on Ndade Thabo and say, going on what Ndade Mbuli has just said, in your experience, how has society and or institution, high school, varsity, modulang deng, do you think the institution or your environment or society has oppressed men in the conversation of gender-based violence, or excluded them, either oppressed or excluded them, either one? But do you think that a lot of where you grew up, the environment you are in, where you went to high school, can we fairly say as men, that's excluded us from the conversation of gender-based violence, and that's why we are so otherwise?
Firstly, to answer your first question about women's dress somehow turning them into the perpetrators of violence against themselves is beyond bizarre. It's just completely unacceptable. There's no scenario in which a man can decide that he owns a woman's body and he is entitled to take action, violent action against a woman, as if he's the custodian of her body and what she wears and her choices, right? There's just no justification for it. We do not own women's bodies, right? We cannot then turn around and say that they are the perpetrators of violence against themselves. It's bizarre. What we've done is we are closing women into a smaller and smaller and smaller jail, prison, confinement, in the name of security, but not addressing the root problem of this sense of entitlement over their bodies that just doesn't exist. Then the second question you've just asked me is the classical maneuver, certainly amongst white people, where they somehow manage to turn themselves into the victim, where we're saying that men have been left out. No, we're central to this. We have never been left out of this. We're central to it. We're central to it in our attitudes. We're central to it in turning a blind eye because we see things, but we choose not to speak. So I don't want us to create an opportunity for men to back out of it and somehow associate themselves with being a victim of society in the discourse. There's a lot that men are victims of. We know this. We know that we've got a society full of a whole host of problems. But guess what? Women are equally victims of these issues, right? They suffer from depression. We've got alcohol abuse. We've got broken families. We've got apartheid, colonialism. We've got a myriad of issues that affect people and our society at large. But we cannot then turn our victimhood into an excuse to impose violence on the next person. Then we're not people. So I don't agree with the concept that we've somehow been excluded. What I will say is that we've ignored our responsibility. We've turned a blind eye. We've rationalized. Some of us have acted in some small way, and then we've made ourselves feel good and then stopped. But this battle is not over. It's a long, long, long battle that we have to keep fighting and be resilient about.
So Rufaro agrees with that last point of yours, and thank you, Rufaro, for your comments. You know, she commented, and I'm sure everybody can see, about the fact that the idea of men being excluded from this conversation speaks to exactly what you said when under the table. Mr. Nyembe, I'm going to come to you now and say...
Sorry, I wasn't given the opportunity to answer your question that you gave to everybody else.
Oh, Askis Ndaterenken, Askis. Please proceed, sir.
Sorry, Chair. No, I just wanted to say, look, I mean, on the question of at what point can, you justify the fact that women may be the cause of the violence, I think you just need to look at this from the construct of violence in itself. At what point is violence acceptable? At what point would you like to see your 12-year-old child come in and have been in a fight or be badly affected? Violence is not something if we are going to talk from the context of humanity, violence is not something that we should condone under any circumstances, right? There are, I suppose, extenuating circumstances, but in general, one shouldn't be saying that violence is tolerable in day-to-day society living. So how much so more can that be then justified when it comes to women? I just wanted to say one thing that's on the chat box around, and also what Mr. Mbuli is saying. One of the things I said right at the beginning is that there are certain behaviors that men are eliciting, practicing, and are being tolerated. And one of these behaviors is, as men, being able to go and have children, but quite comfortably, have nothing to do with them. And as men, amongst each other, we've accepted that as a norm. We actually, in more cases than one, condone it because we don't call it out for what it is. And it's not the question of whether or not single parents, or mothers or gogos have not been successful. As a matter of fact, they've been extremely successful. What the question is, and again, I think I like the context of making it from a humanitarian point of view, is it right that men can go and behave like that? Is it okay for us to condone that kind of behavior amongst each other? As a matter of fact, it's not just condoned, it's revered. It's seen as something to aspire to. And I think it's something that we need to start recontextualizing and saying, hey, maybe that's something we also need to be calling out and saying, you can't be doing that. It has a consequential knock-on effect somewhere along the lines in terms of life and humanity in itself. So that's all I was saying in that I wasn't undermining the capability of single parents to raise their children. I was raised by a single mother for a considerable part of my younger part of my life as well. So if you know my background, you'll know that I'm also a single parent raised child. But that's the only thing I'm saying. Yep, sure.
I think, Ndate Rankin, I'm smiling because I was thinking out loud in terms of saying I can't speak for everyone, but I think for the majority, and again, this is my personal opinion, a lot of us men were raised by single mothers, which again adds to what you're saying, Ndate Rankin, to say we're raised by single mothers, a lot of us in hardship, if we're honest, and it's difficult to understand and to conscribe how raised by a single woman who played both gender roles, who provided for the family, who raised us to be the men that we are today. And then half of us, and again, I speak very loosely, all of a sudden gender-based violence is a thing. But, you know, most of these perpetrators were raised by single Black women in hardship that played both gender roles, you know, that made us who we are. So, you know, it was quite interesting, and it spoke to me personally, you know, in my experience as well. And I know you've spoken to it, and I know Ndate Mbuli alluded to it a little bit earlier about being raised, you know, by a single mom for a large majority of his life. So, Mr. Nyembe, I hope you're still with us. I'm going to come straight into you. 2020, social media, we're not like some other panelists that are on this chat that were born before other certain times. Sexualization of men and women, whether magazines, whether Black Twitter, whether Instagram, there is sexualization. I think given where we are today, it's not only men and it's not only women, but now men are being sexualized more, in my opinion. But women have always been sexualized in different platforms. So I'm going to ask you, Mr. Nyembe, what is the difference between the sexualization of men and women? And do you think that is adding to GBV?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I would say the difference to start off with the sexualization of men and sexualization of women. In my personal experience, I'll have something for saying that it's mainly Black content. I don't have too much content that is outside of the Black community, besides maybe white celebrities and so forth. But in my understanding, start with men, because it's a smaller topic, in my opinion. The sexualization of men, this case is dark-skinned men, the 6-foot Congolese man, the foreign man, this and this and this, a man who's in a swimsuit, sweaty, and all these things. And that sexualization of what a man should look like, beard, and all these things and all these things. but more talking towards the sexualization of women in the sense that black women, in the sense of saying that the light skin, thick girl with a tiny waist and a big bum is very much the talk of the town. The Faith and Getsy, the Kanye Bows. They're very much a talk of the town, and that's in that sexualization. It's very much one where the way men sexualize women is they sexualize them and put them into positions that make them a part of a man's life, but never ruling a man's life. So in that sexualization, when I talk back and I look back to how some of my friends used to talk at school, and what makes you very uncomfortable is how when men envision their future, when they think of what they want to see when they get home, they always imagine themselves arriving at home at 5 o'clock, their G-Wagon into a big house, and their wife is cooking. And this is almost an exact representation of what my friend had said to me. He arrives home, he gets home into his home, his wife is cooking in the kitchen, and he basically bends her over and has sex with her. And you break that down, you really think to yourself, your sexualization of women is for their body parts and how their body parts can provide to you and give to you. Their body parts are only an aspect, and the greater aspect that provides sex as an end goal. Their body parts are the aspect of saying that, is she fit to bear my children? And that conversation that you brought about slut shaming and all these things that Babrankin was trying to grasp, of saying that you look at women and you only imagine a woman in a space of just by herself and almost untouched. Like many a time when you look at our influences, the larger influences are the ones that you see that are single, or they don't have anyone, or they don't post their boyfriends and this and this and this. But a male influence, on the other hand, could post girls at a yacht party or this and that, and showing a life or Playboy life that they live. But a woman can't show the same, because in that sense, they would be devalued because they've been touched by too many men. They hold a value less because they aren't as pure. They don't hold that thing that men want, in a sense, that purity. So yeah.
On that point, sir, I want to bring in Ndate and ask him, given what Ubab Nyembe has just said, what gives us as men the right to police women and their bodies and how they come across? Because I think it's fair to say society has dictated that us as men, we can dictate that when a woman looks a certain way, we judge her a certain way. Who gave us as men the right to police bodies women's? Ms. Mbuli.
I can't give you a clear, direct answer as to, where we got this idea that we should be the overarching authority on how women dress and what consequences should come from how they dress, how they should be valued. All I can say is that is something that should be unlearned, immediately. Like that's, and I think an interesting discussion that stems from that is I'm sure many people on the Zoom call have seen Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion's new music video. Yes, and the song that
so it was trending there. What?
Yes, so it's been trending and it sparked a lot of discussion, and it's something that I was hoping to get to in this discussion, and I'm glad that it's brought us here. And it's this idea of us as men policing women and how they are and how they act, And there's been a lot of outcry from men on social media that I've seen about this music video and the song. And, what kind of values are men teaching women, or women teaching younger girls, how can they be encouraging this kind of behavior? How can they be talking about these things in songs? And I'd like to raise two things on this. Is firstly, Cardi B spoke on it and said, well, listen, she's rapping about her sexuality and her sexual desires, and it's not accepted by society. There are women who rap and make lyrics about intellectual content, about things like gender, about inequality, and that again is not accepted, because then women are talking down on men. Rappers like No Name are not credited enough or seen as being condescending because they rap about, you know, quote unquote serious content, right? And I think what's brilliant about that video is that women having autonomy over their sexual desires and their bodies needs to be normalized, right? Like that a woman's body is a woman's body, you know? And Cardi B is an artist with artistic license, so is Meg Thee Stallion. And if they want to write a song and they know that they have the reach to write a song that gives them that literally, you know, as blunt as they'd like to be about their sexual desires, because we're humans. And I mean, everybody has sexual desires, you know, people speak about it and some people don't, you know, but this idea that I like the idea of what they're doing in that it needs to be taken away from our hands as men. I don't know how it got here, but this idea of how a woman should be, how her body should be, and what autonomy she should have over her sexual desires should fully be in her hands. And that's something that I think Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion deserve a thumbs up on, is encouraging that conversation.
We can get to Bo Cardi B at a later stage, but thanks for that insight, Ms. Mbuli. I'm coming straight to Ndade Thabo as we wrap up our conversation. We're almost out of data bundles, Tinabanye, so we'll have to wrap it up. But in closing, and I'll get an opinion and a final word from all my panelists that have graciously joined me. But I'm coming to you, Ndade Thabo, in asking the space of a man to be traditional and old school, go higher, versus trying to be 21st century in public. Is there a difference? Should there be a difference? And how do we as men support or deconstruct that narrative in terms of like go higher, traditional, expecting certain things as a black male, and then in public, trying to be a 21st century guy?
So let me start off by saying that I think that at the very root of most cultural practices are very important lessons and intentions. Most of them have their roots in trying to build community and observing important rites of passage around issues like birth, issues like moving into adulthood, the cultural practices around marriage, and cultural practices around death. And underpinning a lot of these things, the intention was very much about respect, community, and the likes. Now, what has happened is that with the interruption of colonialism and if we look at many of our cultural practices, I believe that we can still retain the fundamental intent, but we have to relook at the practice, right? I think we have to critically relook at the practice, because what has happened with the practice is that it has become overtaken by interpretation. And that rings true with religious practice. Example, again, I always keep coming back to race, is that any piece of culture, religion, can be interpreted in a way that suits the people practicing it. So the whole notion of how women dress, is it not ironic now that we as Black men are talking about how women dress, right? Whose dress was this? So we've now infused a lot of other influences and muddied the waters to a great extent. And I think we do need to take a pause. I do think we need to look at what is it that we were trying to achieve out of this culture? How does it now relate to the modern society that we're in, right? And how does it carry us forward in a constructive way? So let's take the best.
Can I just stop you there, Ntate Thabo? Apologies. Can I just stop you there? We are meant to be wrapping up at 8:30, and a couple of our panelists do need to log off. So I think from the general perception, and certainly from the comments, and I appreciate everybody on the various social platforms that have been integrating and chatting with us, it's clear that we need to continue this conversation. It's a valid conversation, and one that needs to be had. And I think everybody's appreciative of the panelists and the vulnerability to open themselves up. I'm just going to ask for a closing comment. I know Ntate Nyembe and Ntate Rankin must urgently leave for 8:30. So again, I reiterate, I think the conversation needs to continue, and I will speak to the powers that be at Muse Afrika. Please follow them on all social media platforms, by the way, that we do need to keep the conversation going, and perhaps this is the first of many. So can I just get a closing comment? I'll start with you and Ntate Rankin, and then followed by Ntate Nyembe, about, can you just put into context, just 30 seconds, fella.
Okay, quick summary, because
the role of us black men, where are we going?
Thank you very much. A quick summary. This has been brilliant, very good, well done to Muse and everybody who's put it together. Let me end off by saying thank you to the panelists as well. Fantastic. Let me end off by saying this. I am a spiritual person. I believe in God, so I have a lot of conversations with him. And these are one of the conversations I had with him. When I asked him, when he made man and breathed from the dust to create man, and then he went on to make woman, he then said to me, after making woman, I made the seed of childbearing capability to reside in woman. And then he asked me the question, why do you think I trust only woman to be able to bear what is in my image and what is in my likeness? And I found that powerful, because when we think about ourselves as men, remember we come from women. We are a product of their loins.
Yeah.
And it's that bearing capability that God has given, he's only given to women. Women can have childbearing capability with man's seed in the absence of man, but man cannot have childbearing capability and bear child in the absence of woman. Think about that for a moment. And then ask yourself the question, just talk about equality. Maybe we are the lesser beings in God's eyes. And that's my ending. Think about it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Rankin, thank you very much for your time, Ntate. Yeah, we'll see you.
Mr. Nyembe. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
I think Mr. Nyembe is gone, Coach. I think he's had to run.
All right, has he gone? Okay, I'll come to you, Mr. Mbuli.
I'd like to.
I'll just reiterate again what I said. I think, judging by the comments and what people have said, the conversation definitely needs to keep going. I don't think this is the end or the foreseeable future. I think we need to have more vulnerable moments, like I said. But as a young black male trying to find his way through life, your closing comments just for this session of the gender-based violence.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Tabile and the whole Muse team for putting this together. This is brilliant, and the whole webinar series has been brilliant. Adjusting to COVID, because I know they had big plans for, getting people together, but, adjusting to the times that we're in and still cultivating conversation. I think as men, since this is an engagement we're having as men, the important thing that we need to do after trying to understand all these things and every day waking up and understanding, the systems that benefit us, we need to put ourselves in spaces where we can learn from people with different experiences, because like Paimo said, we'll always have that blind spot. Ntate Thabo and Ntate Lucky and myself will always be men. So we need to learn from women. We need to learn from, people in the LGBTQIA community. We need to learn from people that are oppressed and need to understand that we need to keep hearing their voices, keep amplifying their voices, because our voices are a blind spot. And what we need to be in this journey of gender-based violence is allies. We need to uplift their voice, speak when we can, amongst men, have the conversations that we need to have, hold men accountable, hold ourselves accountable, try and put out consequences there. but understand that at the end of the day, we are allies. And as much as we need to amplify the voices, we need to also try and take some of the burden off of the oppressed groups that we continue to oppress. And yes, thank you for giving us this opportunity to have this discussion. Tabi, thank you, Muse. Thank you, Coach. Thank you, the panelists. Thank you, everybody else also for coming.
Dr. Tabo, thanks for that, Ms. Mbuli. You have yourself a great evening. Have a great week. And then, Gifela, hosted when I fell under the Tabo. So, your closing comments, please, man.
Mr. Mbuli basically said it all. You know, ultimately, we have to actually learn to respect each other as human beings, to recognize the value in each other, and to become allies. We have to be willing to listen. We have to be willing to humble ourselves. We have to be willing to hear the difficult things where we have been complicit. We need to analyze ourselves and recognize the signals and the signs in our own behavior. And if we're going to change the behavior of others, it's by leading by example, and not just by talking, because we live in a country where our politicians talk, but they don't act. So we have to lead by example, but we also need to be humble and we need to listen. Mm-hmm. And similarly, I would like to thank you for a great job in facilitating this. I'd like to thank the Muse team. I was very nervous about this. I was telling Tabila that I was extremely nervous about coming onto this, but thank you for inviting us. Thank you for having us. And thank you for enabling this cross-generational interaction to happen.
Thanks for that, Ndada Tabo. I'll wrap it up from here to say, number one, to my panelists, thank you very much for making yourselves feel vulnerable and uncomfortable, because it is an uncomfortable conversation that we need to have. It's one that will never end. It's one that needs to keep going. So to the powers that be at Muse Afrika, number one, thanks very much for hosting us on this platform and on this channel. I do hope that it's one of many. I do hope that it's an ongoing conversation, because like we've seen and like we've heard, I think it's one that, from a men's perspective, and I'll speak for myself, that we do need to keep chatting. And it's not about, you know, in hours time, we're going to solve GBV, but it's one of those that we need to keep chatting. And half of the chatting, like Ndada Tabo alluded to a little bit earlier, is feeling vulnerable. So I thank the panelists again for feeling vulnerable and open to expose ourselves to what we really think, what we really believe, where we really are going. So from me, Lucky Letsabo, thanks again to Muse Afrika. Please follow them on all sorts of social media platforms. These guys are doing really, really good work. Like, you know, you need to check them out. So please do check them out. From us, I hope it's not goodbye forever. I hope we'll be back again to continue the conversation. To my panelists, have a great evening. Sorry for interrupting your Sunday night carte blanche evening. To the producers and to the organizer of Muse Afrika, thank you very much. From myself, Lucky Letsabo, it's good evening, good night.